Okay, this is our first program on Chapter 1, and this one really deals with anatomy. So there's some vocabulary with some terms. There's objectives for defining anatomy, describing anatomical position, and using anatomical terms correctly. So usually there's a little outline here. This just shows us the organ system, the cardiovascular system, which includes the heart, the blood vessels, and blood. All right. Um, Anatomy is the scientific study of the structures of the human body. Anatomy, science is all about evidence, and so anatomy is just, look and see, take pictures. Um, for us, we're going to focus on systemic anatomy on the bottom, but systemic anatomy includes gross anatomy, large visible structures, microscopic anatomy, the smaller structures from the same system. Um, in some cases, there'll be approaches like regional anatomy, where it's like the anatomy of the head. That would be something like you would have from a dentist. But systemic anatomy is to go through the whole body, one organ system at a time, a group of closely related organs, their tissues, and their cells. Okay. As I mentioned earlier, we're going to study the skin, the muscular system, the skeletal system, and the nervous system. And so we're going to, in those systems, we'll study both microscopic and gross anatomy. And to understand the function of the system, you have to be able to do that. And so we're going to be going into microscopic and gross anatomy within those systems. There are some general ideas that we need to know before we begin the study of anatomy of organ systems. One is there are conventions that we use for communicating with other people that are interested in anatomy, other medical professionals. One is the idea of a standard reference position called anatomical position. In anatomical position, we refer to the human body as if we are standing erect with our legs shoulder width apart, our arms to the side, palms facing forward. And anatomical position defines directions. And so it's always the specimen's direction, the patient's direction, no matter what position they're in, whether they're laying down. And so the midline goes through them as if they were standing erect. Superior means towards the head, um, even when they're lying down. Distal means from the away from the core of the body on a limb. And anatomical position defines a whole bunch of directional terms. Terms like anterior, posterior, superior, inferior. These refer to anatomical position. And it's really important to be able to know this in imaging and looking at things like x-rays and CAT scans, and these things will often be labeled. We're often, when we do imaging, we often see things as a section or a plane that's passing through the body. And so we have the sagittal section that divides the body into left and right halves, if it's mid sagittal or median sagittal, a horizontal plane, which would divide the body into superior and inferior, and the frontal plane, which divides the body into anterior and posterior parts. These planes, again, refer to anatomical position. We talk about them all the time. We often see imaging studies or uh, microscopic sections or drawings that are cut at a particular plane, and so we refer to that. We often also see sections of organs, and so we sometimes use terms longitudinal, cross section, or oblique, and the same organ can appear very different depending on the type of section. Okay, and so we use those terms over and over again. We also refer to body parts and regions, but we don't use the terms that are associated with general speaking. We use Latin based terms, and they're very specific. So, cephalic is the head, cervical is the neck, thorax is the trunk, brachial is the upper arm. We also refer very specifically to things like the abdominal regions, either as quadrants or in the nine quadrants region. And this is important when medical professionals have to talk, like when they're doing surgery or when they're communicating about patient symptoms. Pains are often located in very specific regions, and so it doesn't, um, you can't just say, "Oh, my stomach hurts," because that's in general terminology that might mean anywhere from you know, just above your navel to somewhere under your ribs, and so it's we want to be more specific. Likewise, we have to understand the body is divided not as just in organ systems and organs, but into body cavities and internal. These are internal spaces that allow organs to move independently of one another and to grow independently. So we have spaces like the thoracic cavity, which holds the heart and the lungs, the abdominal cavity. We have dorsal cavities that include the cranial cavity and the vertebral canal. And these cavities are sometimes subdivided. And so, like the thoracic cavity has a space within it that holds the heart. That's the pericardial cavity. And then surrounding that spaces that hold the lungs, the pleural cavities. All these cavities are lined with membranes, thin layers of tissue that are protecting the surfaces of the organ. They're so thin they're like the skin of a balloon. And these membranes line the organ and line the cavity walls itself. And so parietal membranes are the ones that line the cavity, and visceral membranes contact the organs. These membranes secrete fluids to help protect the organs. Those are serous fluids. Okay, here's another picture of the abdominal cavity with the membranes shown. So this is a sagittal view, and so you can see the membranes are wrapping the organs and holding them in position. Okay, this is a lot of terms, tons and tons of terms. Work with your book. We'll work on this with the lab manual. It's our introduction to it, and so um, it's all about doing your best and repetition. And so I'll talk more about that later.